Well, really, this is pretty much the way Emily invited me a year ago to go to Washington. Maybe I should start by rephrasing the thing that the idea that Bob said, where he said Sylvia really enjoyed lobbying from the point of view of. I really did. I'll start from there because it was so personally informative to me, not only about the value of the particular bill that we were advocating about. I spent a day in learning about advocacy and how one approached each office of each different congressional Senate member with presumably an open mind and an open heart, and all the facts about the Youth Promise Act that we were all speaking about at that point. And I was aware of myself that there were only 4 or 5 of us, maybe 3, I can't even remember how many of us went to each of those office buildings, offices, but I remember feeling much more at ease when I went in the office, into the meeting room of a person who, in my mind, I had really thought was on my side, as opposed to entering into the office of someone who was on the other side. Already, and I'm a pretty calm person and open-minded and all of that. I understand meeting about my principal teaching these days is, may I meet this moment fully, may I meet it as a friend. But I can only really do that. No, Peter. That's what
I was in Washington too.
So, but you go in, and these are the good guys, and these are not the good guys. On the level of the limbic psyche. You never mind how much wisdom I have. And we're not. In most cases, we weren't even meeting with the particular elected official. We were meeting with a representative or the chief of staff.
Much more important.
Much more important. And the thing was, Peter, that they were all fantastic. Then I realized one after another that they all got into politics because they feel passionate about it. They have other views than I do. But they're chief of staff of that particular elected official because they're smart and they learned well and they came to another opinion and another point of view than I did. How could that be? My kind people vote the way I do, and unkind people, all those things. But they were all lovely and educated and articulate and really devoting their lives to working about those things. And I realized that one after another that I improved myself from one office to the next. Because at some point, they're really remarkable young people devoting their life, and while I'm still alive and way after me because they're young, they want as much as I do a world where their children will breathe clean air and drink clean water and live in peace and lie down in peace and wake up in peace and all of those things. And so it was really a very good lesson for me in my own kind of, I would say, listen, peacemaking in one's own self, hey, that's my line of work. But it is my line of work. I think it's everybody's line of work forever. And that acknowledging it in myself was really an important thing. So I'm eager to go back again. And when I met with, there was one night when I was on a program talking with, and I was one of the speakers, and Tim Ryan was one of the speakers. And I probably told about my experience with lobbying. And then he went after me. And he said, the thing is, we're all lobbying, all the time. He said, this afternoon, my 8-year-old daughter was lobbying me about getting her a new cell phone because she lost it. He said, everything we do is lobbying. And it just put it in another perspective. It's not a political act. It's a life act. We're all lobbying to have things be the way we want. So anyway, that's what I wanted to put in to begin with, but I really want my friends who I invited, because they're remarkable friends, to add to this discussion, and I hardly even haven't got the right question to ask each of them. But I said to Peter, I could talk a lot about internal, trying to cultivate internal peace, because it's, so to speak, my calling card in life. But I said, well, here's the truth. I call Peter every time I'm not sure, but I read something and I'm not sure I'm making the right decision politically, and so-and-so said that, and so-and-so said that, and I'm confused about that, and I'm confused about that. And I so trust his political acumen and scholarly ability to look at things and have a clear view.
I conceal my own confusions.
You can So I call Peter and I say, what should I think? I send him the various emails that I've gotten that are conflictual. And I say, okay, Peter, what should I believe? Tell me and explain to me why. And the question I asked him when we came in tonight is, look at the four of us, we're all old. How come, excuse me, but we're all old. How come, after a whole life of peace advocacy, we haven't all thrown in the towel? And we're still here talking about it.
I think I knew the answer when you asked the question. Let me see if I can. First of all, I say this to all peace workers from my heart. I think from time to time we should throw in the towel. I don't think 100% devotion to this activity is healthy or sustaining. We live in a very corrupt world, and we have to stay in touch with that world, and we have to be able to enjoy that world. But we should also have a kind of surplus of energy that we gain from enjoying the world, and then it becomes rewarding to use that. I've never thought, well, maybe when I was in my 20s, but since then, that was a long time ago, I don't really expect results. I expect to enjoy the activity, very much to enjoy the people I find myself working with, like you, for example. Those things are very rewarding, and every now and then, to my surprise, something connects. And I just pick up on what Bob Baskin was talking about. There are words we throw around now that are household words, like mindfulness, conflict resolution, and there's a whole list of them. Once upon a time, they were a concept in somebody's head, and then people started talking about them, and they said, we better write something down, and then the next thing you know, they're developing courses, and conflict resolution in particular is everywhere now. It's part of the fabric of this country, but 40 or 50 years ago, I'm not sure that the concept even existed. And so to see those things gradually materializing, and seeing above all that this is a world that is receptive to that kind of progress. Mindfulness, that was also, John Kabat-Zinn has revolutionized this country. I happen to know his political science teacher at MIT. He said it was a terrible loss for the world. John Kabat-Zinn could have been a great political scientist, and now he's doing this mental thing. So I just say, I have loved the life I led, and it would have been a deprived life if I hadn't had the opportunity to work with people like you.
All right, so now we're going to have, well, you want to go next, Barbara?
Fine, go ahead. Sure, yeah.
All right.
Well, I am thrilled to be here because I've been basically a futurist. And so therefore I'm always enjoying what's emerging. And I want to tell you what is really emerging in my mind right now around peace. And I'm so happy that Ava Madison is here because she's been a partner with me for this for so many years. And here's the thought. It comes from an understanding of evolution. The way nature takes jumps is by connecting separate parts to make a new whole greater than and different than the sum of parts. From entropy and disorder to syntropy and higher order for billions and billions of years. It usually happens at a time of crisis, that there are many dysfunctionalities but more innovations. They connect and the system jumps. In human culture, we're all in silos. Even the best of us are in separate organizations, separate pieces, separate parts. All the disciplines, health, education, economics, separate parts, separate silos, separate cultures. So I have been motivated for many years, but I've seen what to do now that has totally turned me on. And I'm 85, so Peter, 1 year older, but nonetheless, I'm the oldest person I ever have known. But here's what the idea is. In the next 5 years, on International Peace Day 2020, to have a planetary awakening by connecting those already co-creating worldwide in an internet connectivity to connect up the emerging world. Make it visible, make it seen, give it the opportunity to interact with itself. And I've been talking to Stephen Dinan, for example, who's been up with Richard Branson and some big circles of entrepreneurs, and he said, what shall we do for International Peace Day? Well, I said, I have an idea. Let's do this. Let's connect not only the peacemakers, but the co-creators in health, in education, in economics, in science and technology, and let's create a map on this internet site. So you place yourself on the map where you fit best. Yes. And Jonas Salk used to say to me, it's not survival of the fittest, but survival of what fits best. So by creating survival of what fits best. So the way this internet will be structured is if somebody comes in and from wherever they come, whatever culture, if their gift to give, and I think of it like this, my inner impulse to create is this. Where do I fit best in the larger whole? And there's some internet system people we're working with. You put that in there and it helps you create your village. It helps you create a global connectivity. And those of us who want to do this, we invite all our friends. Like the entire peace movement would be invited. But they'd be all over the world, the people involved in peace, and specifically what parts of peace they're involved in, like you're saying, Bob. And the accumulation of this level of connectivity, in my heart, I believe we'll be amazed at the beauty of the emerging world.
I think that's stunning. I'm thinking about that's like LinkedIn, but to the nth degree. That's like a planetary LinkedIn.
Planetary LinkedIn, that's a good simple title. And I read the other week from Mark Zuckerberg that 1 billion people were on Facebook in one day. It's 1/7 of the human race. In one day we're on Facebook. I mean, that means the desire for interaction is that great, and how many cell phones there are globally. And just to give an evolutionary impulse here, Teilhard de Chardin, who was my great teacher, Catholic Jesuit paleontologist, never published by the church, he had a vision of the noosphere, N-O-O-S sphere, mind sphere. Peter Russell called it the global brain. That at some point, this internet nervous system that we now have that can get 1 billion people together in one day will connect through love, through creativity, through innovation, and the planetary nervous system, or noosphere, in Teilhard's language, would get its collective eyes. And he called it the Christification of the earth. We're calling it a planetary awakening in love. So that it's not just one by one by one. At a certain point, it's a collective awakening. And it might as well be a collective awakening in love rather than in disaster and breakdown. And another thing about this next 5 years, it's a critical 5 years in the evolution of our species because of global warming and climate change. And there's been a time factor put into all of this. And people now know we have a crisis. And if we do not do the right thing about it, we can render our whole life support system disintegrating. So I just want to say that I'm thrilled to be here in this particular moment. And the International Peace Day being an accumulation on 2020 of all of the people we know collectively. You know, all those thousands of people you're talking about? Yes. Can you imagine if everyone here connected with everybody else who connected with everybody else very, very fast? They're enough.
It's a great pyramid scheme.
If there's enough of us, and I am thrilled to be making this first public announcement in a peace alliance. Thank you.
Oh, I'm
thrilled. I mean, it's so exciting too.
The other thing that, Barbara, what I feel, and I'm sure other people feel, is when someone is thrilled, it's contagious. Yes. So that everybody else gets thrilled.
It really is.
The question of how come we don't all lose heart is that fortunately there's always been enough people on the planet who didn't lose heart at the same time and kept the whole ball rolling. And
It's so true, and you know, I learned this from Abraham Maslow, this particular word. He discovered happiness at a time when the studies were mainly in what's wrong with you and rats. And he tried to discover wellness, and he was really a founder of the Human Potential Movement, and he discovered the characteristic of human happiness and wellness: self-rewarding work. You find intrinsically self-rewarding and of service. So those of us like us, this is self-rewarding.
that's what Peter just said about I had a good life. Even it didn't so far in many ways turn out. Last night I was speaking somewhere, and I said I'm very excited about that vision, because what I have been saying since 3 years ago, or whenever, how many years ago was the Arab Spring, the vision that I most was thrilled by was the vision of all of the people in that square in Cairo. So many people in that square, in peace, all texting each other. And I thought to myself, that's going to be what's going to save the world. All people, more of the world is young than not, and they want to live. And I said, enough people have to figure out what's the ultimate text. And I've been giving people I've been giving people the assignment and a challenge since then. I said, I have the feeling that if somebody came up with absolutely the 140 character tweet that said, this is it, fellas, it's our planet, let's take it back, put down all the guns, peace now, make friends with everybody, whatever it is, of 140 characters, and that will get Marx Hubbard
This could happen.
to tweet that to everybody, 1 billion people at the same time. And people are sending me routinely 140 characters of what they think is going to be the ultimate.
I love this thing. And also in it is the wisdom of the entire world.
That's right.
If you have any question about anything, the thing that I could think is totally stunning.
Yes.
The emerging capacities of humanity. I just want to add that as a futurist. Not only do we have the heart, the love, and this impulse, but we are connected with capacities.
We have the libraries of the world.
Oh my God.
I want to say the internet that's not the future, that's the present.
It is.
And we are now a global village. It's been done. I have a Facebook page, and every day I have new friends from maybe 6 to 12 countries every day. We are creating new kinds of electronic communities. That is an enormous change. It wasn't around 20 years ago. It's amazing.
I'd like to say one more simple thing, because I've been guided over the years to do something called a global communion of pioneering souls. Now, pioneering souls would be anyone, anywhere on earth who somehow is receptive to this. So every other Sunday from 8 to 9, I'm doing a vibrational church. The vibrational church is to invite the vibration of love, of creativity, in kind of inspired dialogue, to just connect people free, and see how many pioneering souls would vibrate together, creating harmonic that affects the noosphere. So if anybody is interested, you just give me your email and you'll get an invitation for a free vibrational call from the Global Communion of Pioneering Souls. See how many of us would like to join just in the field of love.
That's it. So you will sign up?
If you want to be on it, just give your email to me and I will invite you to be on it. You'll just get a notice to get on it.
So Patricia, what do you say? What are you thinking?
Oh, it's so much fun to have Daniel Ellsberg as a husband who's fighting, all the bad things. And my sister's staying with me now. She's going to move to this area. And it's just, I'm kind of like between these two very different approaches to the same thing. Like I go back and forth. And I just love it. And I'm working with Barbara with the Planetary Awakening. We're real co-partners. But I was talking to Dan, because he's writing his book diligently, I hope. It has a book deadline, so he didn't come today. But I was fascinated with some of the new insights he's had, and in the context of how the idea of peace has come, that it's time, because force doesn't work. And we're really realizing that, after Vietnam, after Iraq, and finally with Iran, enough energy to get diplomacy versus bombing. But it just doesn't work. And what he was saying just the other day to me is that there wasn't one person that we've killed in the wars of intervention since World War II that increased our security. Now that's pretty shocking, but it's also good news. Like, this isn't helping. We don't need it. and then he was saying that the fact is that the individuals, the peace is coming from people. And this is the Peace Alliance. So the Peace Alliance draws together kind of Dan's insights and Peter's insights of what's wrong. And then the bringing community, bringing love. You can feel it in this room. You just walk in here, and everyone I've met so far, we were just starting with Deborah right there, and I just fell in love with her. And she's doing the subtle energy moment of peace, at the top of every hour, and we go and get her amplified. And so it's this gorgeous uprising. And so for all that the governments themselves are just caught in the old paradigm, there, I think, is this upsurging of energy that will come from the people. And the Peace Alliance is just such a beautiful umbrella for this, in bringing the people's passion for peace to the power structure, but very individually and very lovingly. The other thing that I was thinking of my own is that we are facing such a crisis with the global warming, etc., the environmental. And what we really need to do, I feel, is get an alliance between the people that are committed to the environment and peace. That the two are absolutely intertwined. Because the budgets that are going to building, like there's $1 trillion allocated over the next 10 years with Obama to renew refurbish our nuclear weapons. And the only enemy that is actually out to attack the United States is Al-Qaeda. You cannot believe that the nuclear weapons are going to help us with Al-Qaeda. And there's new news as well. Again, the nuclear winter was somewhat discredited years ago, Carl Sagan and all of that. That the effect of using nuclear weapons would kill all life because of the radiation, etc. There's relatively new, with computer sophistication now, and it's called nuclear autumn. And even if India and Pakistan use the bombs that they have, the nuclear bombs, it would cause so much smoke that about 2 billion people would die. What I'm really trying to say is that the old modes are antiquated. The power structure that has blossomed and gotten rich and powerful from it is not ready to give it up. Where is it going to come from? It's going to come from love, and it's going to come from every one of us in alliance and in cooperation. And what is creative, linking it, finding the synergies. And Eisenhower said it, he said, the people, when they have a yearning so strong for peace, they're just going to get the governments to move over and they'll get their way. And that's what it is, and it's love. It is really the power of love for life, for our children, for nature, and our time is coming. It really is here. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. Say a little bit about what you said to me outside just before we started about, because when Patricia was just talking about, people are really feeling we have to have something new now, that on some level, a lot of people are really frustrated that things are the way they are, and even that they're sometimes frustrated in wildly opposite polarities of opinion, that you were talking about the level of frustration being indicative of a surge of human power. So talk about that a little bit.
Well, normally I don't think about electoral politics because I'm a Canadian here and I don't vote, but it is very striking to look how, you know, they say before you have the primaries, you have the invisible primary, which is when people like Jeb Bush go out and raise $100 million, and that the people who win the invisible primary, and there's a bunch of them in both parties, they're the winners, and then they go out and go to Iowa and New Hampshire and do the primaries that we think about. But something very strange has happened, that the winners of the invisible primary was certainly Jeb Bush, certainly Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side, and somehow it doesn't look that they're really going to be the winners. And that is, it's happened simultaneously in both parties. Canada's about to have an election in which the NDP, which has been around, my father helped start it actually back in the 30s, it could conceivably be the next government in Canada. It's not clear. But just in the paper this morning, this man Corbyn has won the vote for the head of the Labour Party in Britain, which is, he's the Bernie Sanders of Britain, if you like. And so we are seeing everywhere is a sense that the system, a very, not just people like us, but the ordinary electorate are seeing that the system is not working, clearly not working. And so that I think that's what you wanted me to say, isn't it?
Well, I wanted to say that at least, and to elaborate a little about what you just did, that people are one way or another saying it's got to change.
I must say, I don't want to end that on the note is that let's sit back and see that some good person is going to be the next president. No, the real future is more here in this room than it is in any caucus, I think, in Iowa. So, but it is what we are doing, which is trying to set out an alternative way of approaching the world's problems. I also want to come back to the global warming thing. Global warming is obviously a very dangerous thing, but like many dangerous things, it is also an immense opportunity. It really is. People have to work together on this, and more people are realizing it. And what I have been keeping my eye on, corporations are realizing that even oil companies are beginning to recognize you can't just go on the old way, extracting more raw materials. And they say that if we continue to exploit the going after fossil fuels, pretty soon there will be no more ice at all. And you can imagine where the ocean level will be then. So this consciousness is being forced by physics, by science, creating a coalition of all kinds of people who would never be seen here, but are going to have to join the fight to do something about global warming. And to do something about global warming, you're going to have to change the political structures of this country. So I think that's all. It's terrible, but it's also hopeful.
I have a friend in Phoenix who bought property on the belief that someday it would be beachfront property.
And crisis precedes transformation in evolution. And we've got exactly the crisis we need, but we still have some time.
It's good there's a date on it. We can't say, yes, someday we're going to have to do something about it. No, the date is right now.
That's right.
I felt actually when you said it this morning, Peter, and said it again now, that because I've been really thinking about trying to make sense out of, on the one hand, appreciating how Bernie Sanders has sort of come out of left field without Mrs. Clinton's.
His advantage is he's coming from left field.
Yes, he's coming but the coming from other people coming from right field also picking up tremendous steam. But that to see that rather than to see that as people are really waking up and saying the usual, same old is not working, and we really need to look in a new way. I feel better too. Did you want to say something more, or should we ask people to ask us questions?
Just one other thing that I didn't say, but when, back in our first year of marriage, actually, we put out the Pentagon Papers, and Dan was indicted for 115 years for telling the truth, that we've been lied into this war. But what isn't known much is that we were really inspired by Gandhian and by a close group of Gandhians, pacifists. Dan at Rand, when he was, before we were married, went to a war resistors meeting and was really moved by this beautiful Indian woman that's been a friend for the rest of our lives. And she said, in our culture, being a Gandhian culture, we have no enemy. And Dan at Rand and the Air Force and, you know, nuclear planning, what? And it sunk in. And Gandhi's truth, which we were guided by, is the truth of our oneness. And he called it satyagraha, clinging to the truth, the power of truth. And he also called it, you know, one is the truth force as a translation, love force is a translation. And that is Dan's spiritual practice. I go to Spirit Rock. Dan goes and gets arrested. And he's 84, he's in 85th arrest this year. And I'm so proud of it. I was telling somebody, a friend, you know, at a party she didn't know about Dan. I said, my husband just got arrested for the 81st time. And she asked the host, she said, she's proud of that?
I'm a little ashamed that I've never been. But I have been at Spirit Rock. Sylvia, I think, was teaching me.
I was only arrested once on the eve of invading Afghanistan. There was a clergy protest. What did you call it? Civil disobedience.
Yes, that's it.
Clergy civil disobedience. So I was there as clergy with some of my friends from Spirit Rock. And we were all in front of the federal building, and it was really I felt everything about it. I felt very strongly about doing it. I was proud to do it because I hadn't done it before, and I felt now I have actually done it. You haven't been arrested. Oh no, you're Canadian. Don't get arrested.
Dan Ellsberg happens to be my best friend. But I was a Gandhian before I met Dan. To me, the essence of Gandhian protest was always protesting unjust laws, which the British had any number of in India and South Africa where it began. And often people get arrested here, but they're arrested for sitting in the street. But the law that says you shouldn't sit in the street, I don't regard as an unjust law. So it's a bit different. But I do think that I totally agree with Patricia that you know, we can draw inspiration from the fact that you know, in Malaya, for example, the British Empire, they had an armed resistance, and there was a rather bitter series of fights after World War II, and the armed resistance lost. But in India, you had an unarmed resistance, and it was unstoppable. And that is, I'm not just going to give one example here. The success of the civil rights movement in the South was because they were nonviolent. They were Gandhian. Martin Luther King always invoked the example of Gandhi, and they, of course, were protesting unjust laws. So, and it's to my shame that I was not one of those who went down to Selma or those places, because that was a very noble movement, and it was won by very courageous blacks mostly, but whites also, and in the end, clergy in the South who said, this is not the South we want to preserve, and they came around and non-violently accepted that there had to be an end to things. Ultimately, it took, of course, legislation, and that's part of the story. And of course, that Johnson established a Civil Rights Act and a Voting Act, and destroyed the Democratic Party in the South. I mean, these things are very painful and dialectical, but that is an amazing success story. You know, sometimes we want to be ashamed of America because we're viewed in the world as the most dangerous country in the world and the most belligerent and so on. We also have one of the most noble examples of a successful nonviolent revolution in the South. And then, because I spent 2 years in Poland, I am very interested in the success of Solidarity in Poland in the 80s. They were also nonviolent, and it, you know, a few years earlier there were violent uprisings. Hungary, for example. Hungary achieved nothing, but Solidarity liberated not just Poland, but really the whole of Eastern Europe. So nonviolence works. We've seen it work. And we just have to build on those successes. As a poet, I try to meld all that into my poetry. So that's why, for me, it's very exciting to live in this country. And of course, the government gives me a lot to be very depressed about. But the country is inspiring, and the people I meet are inspiring. So I'm very glad to be alive in this time when important things can be done and can contribute a minuscule portion to it.
I always get excited when you talk. You always say things so well. I'm just going to tell before I'm going to say, does anybody have any questions? At the end, I want to tell because I just remembered when on that time that I got arrested, it was all very peaceful because we just sat down in front of the door. We blocked traffic in the federal building. And they said, if you don't get up, these marshals with big boots, and they said, if you don't get up and leave in 2 minutes, we're going to arrest you. And then we didn't. And they say, okay, we're going to have to arrest you. And I was among the first people. My other daughter was at home watching on TV. She said I could watch the whole thing and I was all right. And she said, until I saw my little mother stand up and have to put her arm I started crying. But we spent 2 hours in a jail cell, about 40 people. And amongst the people who were jailed that day was a Franciscan priest who had just gotten out of jail the day before for a glass violence. I've forgotten his name, but he has a record for going to jail. But we spent a couple of hours, and then they took down our names and fingerprinted and took a picture. And then they let us out one by one. And my friend Susan Felix, who left just before me, said that the guard who escorted her to the door, because they escort you to the door of the federal building, and he escorted her to the door, and just before she left, he said, would you give me a blessing, please? I think that what you said about people being, in the end, people are the Southerners who wanted to do the right thing, right? You know? In the end.
You mustn't forget that part of the civil rights successful story, that they persuaded people who had been part of the segregationist structure and said this can't go on.
Sylvia, when I was arrested with Dan about the Iraq War, the second one, we got arrested. As we were being let out, like you, one of the policemen asked for Dan's autograph. So there's hope.
Let me reverse the story. Dan told, when Howard Zinn died, Dan, in commemorating his memory, he said there were a lot of wonderful things to say, but this story I found particularly interesting and something we need to consider. Howard Zinn Dan and Howard were arrested at a protest together. And about a week earlier, Howard Zinn had gone and lectured to a police academy about war and violence and the need for an alternative. And this policeman came up and said to Howard Zinn, that was a wonderful talk you gave. It really was very helpful to us, and it's very, very useful, the work you're doing, wonderful work. Well, about 4 hours later, the same policeman came back and said, Professor Zinn, please get out of here right now. We're going to have to crack down on people, not that verb. I'm not sure I'm quoting exactly, but it was in that. So please, 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 just leave, get out of here. And Howard Zinn sat there, Dan sat next to him. And then the same policeman came, not even with an ordinary thing, but with like a 4-foot stick, and beat both Dan and Howard until there was blood in their faces. So this is the kind of problem that we have to deal with. People follow orders. Good people follow bad orders. And so there is a political task to be dealt with. We need better orders as well as better people.
That's where the Peace Alliance comes
That's
in.
right. Exactly. I loved that interview with Tim Ryan. That was very, very hopeful.
And of course, we haven't mentioned the uprising of women, because I graduated from college in 1951, and that was the last generation that came out of educated women. And then when Betty Friedan wrote *The Feminine Mystique* in the late 50s, early 60s, she found that most women were depressed because they had lost a sense of identity beyond wife and mother, because that was the identity that we were given. And I think of myself, because I got married and I loved my husband, I had 5 children, and this deep depression took hold after about the 4th child. And the depression was I had no vocation. And so the rise of the feminine, and not only just feminism, but the feminine creative impulse has been freed radically. Radical change. You know, along with the civil rights movement and the rise of the peace movement, but I think, and the consciousness movement. So there's been a tremendous success in that regard in the last 50 years.
Would you like to ask anything? I would never say it about her.
I just want to add thank you, because I think that's part of what you're saying. You know, the rise of the feminine is going to help put us back into balance.
Yes,
And
exactly.
put back into balance is
Huge
going to put us
uprising.
into balance.
Yeah.
You know, which is part of what I think needs to happen
Right.
here, is to create balance, because there's this nurturing, healing essence that's
And
coming from that.
creativity of the feminine,
Yeah.
living longer and not having that many babies anymore, and not dying. I coined a word for us, it's regenopause.
And being able to go to school, there are more women out of school than men.
Well, we're raising a whole new civilization, a whole new,
Yes,
you know, we don't have to raise as many babies, but we can raise a whole lot more.
That's exactly it.
But for men too, living longer is creating the opportunity. People work very hard, their life is over. What are you going to do with your life? You're going to be alive for another 30 years.
Yes, exactly.
So this is the raw material for a peace movement.
Longevity, isn't it?
That's a very hopeful thing. People now have time
Yes.
to do that.
And you know, if they're a vice president of Shell Oil, then they talk about oil. But if they're retired, they can just talk about what is important as a human being.
That's right.
What were you going to ask?
In order to facilitate this process of change, certainly building up loving relationships is primary. It would seem to me that the major impediment are those who push for fear. That fear is the tool which pushes for wars, for armaments, for discrimination. And is there any way to directly combat that, or work with that, or just is love just going to eventually overcome that? I mean, like even just now, former Vice President Cheney is waving the big nuclear thing. You will die by a nuclear blast if you permit Iran this deal. And this is also what pushes the prison debacle of that you're going to create, unless we create loving people who are coming out. You know, it's like an 80-85% recidivism rate. That can you change anybody to become loving by punishing them and hurting them or shaming them?
Answer just quickly is I think that what the Peace Alliance is saying here, success rate of international peace agreements when negotiated through mediation, 62%, 27% unmediated. I mean, and the nonviolence in the schools. I mean, that it's not so much, don't be afraid, as creating ways that work, that bring forth the natural desire to be in community.
Like the restorative justice.
Restorative justice.
Judy or Matt or Terry, does anybody want to speak a little bit about, you know, the restorative justice on the rise and really how that's playing a big part in, it's a big peace building.
Well, so that's a good question. Restorative justice, some of you probably heard of it, some haven't. It's a healing-oriented alternative to traditional, more punitive methods of dealing with conflict, or if there's been a crime, or so many things. And it's a really old process based out of the indigenous people from New Zealand, whose name I can't think of right now. But it's a beautiful process that's now entered kind of mainstream culture, and it's in schools across the country. A lot of communities are using it to deal with conflict. So if kids get into a fight at school, for example, you know, the teacher, a couple of teachers, the principal, the counselor, the parents, the victim, the perpetrator. People don't like those words, victim and perpetrator, but I'm not up on the lingo. We'll sit in a circle process and dialogue and look for ways to repair the harm. It's a simple idea, but it's really profound. And so as these kids were often getting into trouble again and again and again, just like prisoners when they leave prison, or almost 70% return to prison. So the recidivism rate's huge. The rates are dropping down to 6%, you know, from much, much higher proportions. So it's just, there's so many things, and I just want to share, adding on to that, this ties into what you were sharing, Barbara, which is so awesome. I love the idea of what you're doing. I always feel like you're way on the leading edge, just sort of trying to get us to come along, and everybody's kind of bumbling in their thing. But I always love what you share, and I love the idea of creating this map. And on our website, on each of these cornerstones in this Be the Movement brochure, we have the start of, in these sectors, the different kind of modalities, like restorative justice is in humanizing justice, it's in teaching peace in schools, just descriptions of different kinds of things that are out there happening and working very effectively. So you can go and read more about those if you feel inspired. And then there's groups, there's all these groups, and that feeds into that as we're starting to map out in the peace building field, what are the groups that are doing this incredible work. And so as you get rolling, I'd love, you know, we'll help plug it in for sure.
Yeah, and you know, something else to notice, that the average person who does not go to meetings like this does not know what's working.
Right.
They would not know from watching the news or from reading the papers. They are always getting what's not working, or what puts you to sleep. It's an infantile nervous system.
I think it's so important, because then we go to bed, see, the prison systems are screwed, it's bad, and there's no sense that we can do something. And yet if we start to see, look at using this restorative justice process, we've gone from an 85% recidivism, and in some places down to 8%. And you go, whoa, it works.
That's news, you see.
It's news. I want a
That's
good
the
news channel. No, because there are so many places where we know how to do this, and just getting it more widespread so it becomes more, and it is happening. I think it's just the acceleration of it is what we're looking to have happen, because we are on a time limit. So thank you for pointing that out.
I just wonder if, I'm sorry I talked too much, but the media, first of all, media news is so degenerate now compared to what it was during the Vietnam War, when it was actually a factor. I wonder whether the Peace Alliance has a program to deal with the problem of the media, what they're excluding and what they're
Just this morning while we were here, we had our monthly action call, and our guest speaker was David Boorstein. He's a New York Times writer, and he's called Solutions Media, and he does this. He writes all the time for the New York Times. But he's focusing on it. What we do is we train our grassroots organizers to work with the media, to go to the editorial boards and start to educate them, because they're always looking for stories. The budgets are being slashed is a big part of the problem, because especially newspapers, you know, it's all going to multimedia, and then all that's just coming from one source, from the AP or something. So we train them to go and bring in the material. We write it for them, essentially. And we take that, and we're starting to see, we've gotten some editorials written. The New York Times had a great editorial 2 days ago that they generated about restorative justice in universities and what's happening there. So we do, that's one of our key, the media is a key, you know, way for us to get the message out and bring the good news that is there, trying to get it out. So the more we build up the support and the resources to do that, the more hopefully effective we'll be in this story.
I also think there's something to be said for picking particular dates to do something, and not to just, I remember that they told me during the Kennedy administration and the lunar landing if John F. Kennedy had said, we'll put a man on the moon and bring him back sometime, it wouldn't have happened. They had to go within this decade. And I just want to add one other thought I think we could do, and I did learn it from the space program. I was visiting Dr. Thomas Paine at NASA. He was the administrator. And there was on this wall this huge perk chart of every technological achievement that it took to bring that lunar landing to happen. And at the end of this huge perk chart, there was one picture of an astronaut, and under it said, bring him back alive. And what Tom Paine told me is that with that one idea, everybody anywhere in the world working on this knew that if they made a mistake and didn't self-correct, it could destroy it, as it did actually to the shuttle program. So it occurred to me that we could have a huge self-mapping perk chart. And it would have health, education, economics, and I'm going to do this and that and then, and when I'm going to do it. And up the pictures bring us forward alive.
Oh, that's great.
You know, because a target date to bring us forward alive, and where's Avon?
She had to step out.
Oh, she had to leave. Because she picked this International Peace Day that seems to have been already selected by the culture. And it's very, very good. At 5 years, you know, Vision 2020, all of these things work.
Barbara, what you're talking about is happening at the UN with the Sustainable Development Goals. It used to be the Millennium Development Goals.
Right.
Now it's the Sustainable Development Goals by the year 2020.
Really?
These things will have been accomplished, and it's worth looking at the UN website. I don't know the details, but
There are probably a lot of things already being targeted, and we would all be invited to share what they're doing. And then you begin to get the non-linear exponential interaction of what's working. That's Ilya Prigogine.
I wanted to mention something with what you guys were talking about too. I can't see your name. My eyes are open.
That's Seymour.
Hi. What I'm finding in working with CEOs is that love is being allowed. It's not a, as we were talking about, it's not a shameful thing to talk about love anymore. It's not the hidden thing in the room. You know, it's going to make me too woo-woo or too, you know, not strong enough, that it's actually being able to be talked about. And one of the programs that I work with that go into the jails, they have the leaders in the jails with the leaders of the CEO doing healing work together, talking about love rather than fear and next steps, which affects what you're talking about and yours in the next step in creating new leaders out of even the guys that are coming out of jail. So I mean, that's just one program. So I feel like that's where you address fear versus love, and that it is ready, it's primed. People get it culturally, even within companies.
Could I add one more point about social evolution? Is the word social synergy. It's deeper than even cooperation. And basically the three questions that we did a lot of conferences like this is, what do you want to create? What do you need to create it that you most deeply need and don't have? And then you ask in the group, who has what this person needs? Well, you make vocational dating. So this is my goal, this is what I most need, and the third thing is, this is what I most want to give freely. And if you ask a group of people that, according to what they want to give, you will always find in any small group of people, enormous resources are shared, and there's a love that's exchanged in connecting with somebody needs, and you have to give it. So it generates a social love affair. And we did 25 conferences like this, and Edgar Mitchell came into one of them when we took the walls down between the sectors, and he said, if we'd had a spiritual Geiger counter, it would have gone off the charts. And the root of the word religion is re-legare, bind back and make whole. So the word wholeness, by taking separate parts and connecting innovations through matching needs with resources, actually creates a jump. And since nature has been doing this for millions of years, we can do it too. It's natural, in other words.
Beautiful.
Thank you. I'm just conscious of time, so looking to, anybody have any questions for these amazing people, or we're just all sitting here stunned?
I just want to go back to what Barbara said about the women power. Talk about nonviolence and silence that is making a huge impact in our world, and I just want to call on all the women to keep going. We've done it. We blew it, so let's have you. But I'm fortunate enough I get to coach some very powerful women in the world. And what's great when they discover that they don't have to compete with the men to get the position, but can just be themselves and move in with power and grace, they wind up in really significant ways.
And there are wonderful men out there now.
Claire.
I'm aware that there's the Alternatives to Violence program that's national and now international. Groups of people who've been trained to do this go into prisons and offer processes of healing. They're really fine. I've done the basic training. It's not mine to do now in my life, but I have so much regard for it, and its effects are enormous.
Yes.
So if anybody here is interested in that, there are ways to be trained and really fine people involved.
Isn't that a beautiful thing? I feel like the world is a candy store in terms of, you get to pick what fits for you. What's the way you want to give? And that's actually where you will find your joy.
It's true.
And
your energy.
yeah. And that rather than I should do this.
Yes,
if
right.
this, you can feel it, like, wow, this is inspiring me. We're hoping that today is inspiring you, and that perhaps the Peace Alliance is something that you want to